Well, hello everyone. Welcome to this week's exciting episode of Certified Forgotten. We are still, as we always have been, as we always will be, the only horror film podcast that talks about movies with 10 or fewer reviews on Rotten Tomatoes. If we need to sell you on this, if this is the first episode you've ever watched because you really like Landlocked, A, you have fucking good taste. You should be proud of yourself for that. But B, you should know that some films are certified fresh, some films are certified rotten. Our films are certified forgotten. We've got to catch a little hook. We love it. We're going to start telling you about it every single time. One half of your Matt hosts. My name is Matt Monagle. I am joined by my partner in crime, the left coast to my, I don't know, south coast, Texas coast. It's Matt Donato. How you doing, buddy?
Doing good. I like how you come out the gate and you're like, it's going to be an exciting episode, but like, what if it isn't?
Well, then what we'll do is we will blame our guest, and both of us will get away reputation scot-free. That is the purview of being a host, is that when stuff goes right, it's because we planned it. When stuff goes wrong, it's because our guest fucking sucked.
I like that. It is the mark of a good host that if it's bad, it's not our fault.
Correct. And you know what? That feels like a great opportunity for you to introduce our potentially terrible guest this week.
I was just going to do that, actually, and it would have been a perfect segue, but you cut me off. Anyway, let me take the segue back and say we do have a returning guest who we are very happy to have. I have known this person. We have known this person for a while. Matt and Austin, me traveling around for the Austin festivals. We bring back and I'm going to say it because he wanted me to say the whole thing, the senior staff writer, head critic, and utility specialist of the Austin Chronicle, Mr. Richard Whittaker. Hello, welcome back.
Utility pinch hitter.
Oh, sorry, utility pinch hitter.
That was you. Okay, so if we go 0 for 2 on me and appearances on this show, like you've already taken the blame on yourself.
That's true. And thank you for mentioning the fact this is 0 for 2, because there are going to be people that are going to listen to the podcast and say, oh, you guys aren't really, doing the whole introduction, the whole horror fan history thing with Richard. That's because we did that on episode 49 when Richard joined us to talk about Warning, Do Not Play, which is a really fun ghost story movie that A, you should listen to the episode, and then B, you should watch the film because it's cool and interesting and we think you would like it. You still stand by that recommendation, Richard?
Oh, absolutely.
There we go.
100%. Yeah. I also stand by the recommendation of going back and listening to that episode because it was fun. Also, just listen to every episode of this show because it's always a blast.
That's not a wrong thing to say at all. That's very true.
That's me lining up to go 0 for 3 at some point.
So we recommend episode 49. It's in our feed. Go check it out. Richard talks a lot about his upbringing as a horror fan, his upbringing, especially with watching horror movies, access to the video nasties and the way that was playing out outside of the United States, which is a great perspective to have. But today, as sort of a leading conversation, our return guests, we usually say, hey, what's grinding your gears, sorry, Family Guy, in the world of horror? And Richard, for a decade minimum, you have kind of been reporting on the triumphs and travails of the Alamo Drafthouse. And one of the things that has been causing Twitter to be all a Twitter the last couple of weeks was the announcement that Sony was purchasing the Alamo Drafthouse, what that means for the community events, what that means for the success of the franchise, et cetera, et cetera. So as somebody who has officially reported on this and other stories related to the Drafthouse, I'd love to start the conversation by saying, how are you feeling about the future of Austin's own little indie movie empire?
I'm going to go with pretty upbeat, which I know nobody wanted to be. Everybody was like, it's the end, doom and gloom, it's being taken over by corporate forces. I was like, you do realize that it's been majority owned by venture capitalists for over a decade. And the only reason it came out of bankruptcy was because more venture capitalists in the form of Fortress, the big investors, came in and bought them out of Chapter 11 as part of a consortium with the old owners and Tim League. Otherwise, there wouldn't be anything. But, I mean, I don't think anybody's been super happy with how the Drafthouse has been run for the last few years. It's really felt there's been a degradation of the experience. And, that's... I think the real concern was that at some point, they were going to get broken up or sold off for spare parts or dumped on the market in the worst possible way. So, I went back and I think my first story on the Draft House was like 2008 or something. And my first time in a Draft House was actually the Oscar watch party at the original Draft House on Colorado Street in Austin in 2001, when that place was bootleg as hell. I mean, the early days, everybody kind of goes, well, it was like, gutsy and gritty, and it's like they were totally under the radar. I think it could only have happened in Austin because you already had a film appreciation culture which had been built up around the Dolby, which was the old artsy cinema, which is this wacky little 6-screener, and each of the screens was individually themed, and there was an Egyptian themed one where there were hieroglyphics all around the walls, and there was one that looked like Dracula's tomb. This place was completely nuts. And that had helped build the culture in the Austin Film Society. So when the Draft House opens, you already have people who are really interested in watching weirdo, oddball films.
Mm-hmm.
And you're, at the same time, while you've got that audience primed, you're just far enough away from both the lawyers in New York and the studios in LA to get away with pretty much murder. It's like everything was under the radar. And over the years, they became more and more legitimate. I think the most important moment was when they really went, okay, we have to start licensing Mondo prints. We can't just do them because we're big enough now. People are going to notice if we do a Near Dark or Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3 poster. We have to actually start being a bit more legit. So, if you want to say, oh, it went corporate then. It's been a corporation for a very long time. So now we're in this situation where, it's under Sony. We're hearing rumors, I think back in March, I think it was just before CinemaCon, that there was a possibility that they were looking for a buyer, and that it was a studio. And, I think a lot of people were throwing around Netflix. My theory was Disney, because they've got a very good working relationship with Disney at the moment. In fact, they've the Alamo Village in Austin, they've turned that into a repertory theater in part, just so they can show they have access to the Disney animation archive. Because, fun fact, I didn't know, you can get, if you're a cinema, you can show the classic Disney animations. You just can't show modern Disney films. So they went, well, what if we just show it at this one location? And Disney went, yeah, that's fine. So, they showed Snow White and Alice in Wonderland and had them for a full run. And it's like this. So it's been great. If you're a Disney fan, it's been wonderful. And I think the first fear people had when it was announced Sony was taking over was that we're going to lose all of that and that it's going to become Sony specific. I don't think there's any chance of that happening. Because one, Sony doesn't produce enough films in a year to fill every Draft House screen. I mean, let's just realistic about this.
Sure.
Two, Sony believes in theatrical. That's Tom Rothman, who's the CEO. He, there's a reason that he's kept them out of the streaming wars, and there's never been a Sony streaming platform, because they've looked at it and gone like, do we really want to lose money like everybody else? No. And, Rothman just believes in theatrical. The other exciting bit is that they've bought Fantastic Fest as well. And the head of Sony Acquisitions said, he's got indie festivals. We love them. And he was saying this months and months ago before any of this started. They were saying, like, we want a healthy environment of indie festival. So if the situation is, if there's any kind of symbiosis between Sony Pictures and Fantastic Fest, for example, I think it's that Sony's probably going to get first dibs because they're going to get first look. But I think they like the business model. That's everything I'm hearing, is that they have come in and they want the Draft House to be the Draft House. The first thing they did with beyond the initial investment of buying the Draft House out is that they bought back the 6 locations that just closed because the franchisee went bankrupt. and they're spinning them back up again as fast as possible. And they're trying to make good with customers by, if you're in the loyalty club, if you in Victory, if you've got an Alamo membership card, like they added a month back on, so they go like, so the first thing they've said is this is business as usual. And then, it's that old thing. It's like there's two ways for anybody buying a company to look at it. One, you want to change it, in which case, why did you buy it? Or two, you want to keep it as it is, which is why you buy it. So I think they've looked at it and gone like, we want the Draft House to add its cachet to what we do, and it's being put into its own subdivision, which is Sony Pictures Experience, and they've got to be looking at things like, last night they had huge screening of Star Wars, and it was a Draft House screening, and it was Fenway Park. I think I'm going like, okay, this works for us. This is this makes Sony look way cool by having like the Draft House, and if they can make it, a little close to what it was and a little bit more, let's face it, better funded. I think it'll be a bit. Sure. I think in 6 months' time, everybody will go like, "Yay, it's a new golden age."
And I mean, that's the thing, coming from my corporate background and my day job, it's like I work for a very large company in our sector, and we often acquire other companies. That is what we do. And when we acquire a company, it is not to break it down for parts and completely just fire everyone, do all that stuff. Like when we acquire a company, it's because they do something better than we do, and we would like to incorporate that into our program and incorporate that into our actual ecosystem as a living, breathing entity. So that was the one thing that made me feel better about the announcement, because it was exactly what you just kind of ended with there. Like, Sony doesn't buy that to turn it into another generic theater. Those are failing more than obviously the Alamo is. So like, you keep the Alamo what it is, you honor its tradition. And if I changed one thing, or if I brought one thing back, I don't know if you're all the same, but I miss having the regional menus. Like I loved when the Brooklyn Alamo opened up.
Yeah.
And it was a very Brooklyn menu. It was a very New York, like they had hot dogs and stuff like that, but like gussied up the Alamo way. And then when I came out here and they opened the LA Alamo, they had burritos. They had a focus on like local cuisine. And I really liked those little touches that when you went to an Alamo in a different state or anywhere else, you were getting like a flavor of that culture. So like, I would love if they brought that back. I know they're not going to. It's just way easier to have a single menu that goes across everything. But I miss those days when I could go to my either coast and have completely different like catered menus.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think also on the subject of food, bring back the Enter the Dragon just as a permanent thing. Just bring it back. I don't know why they got rid of it. Everybody's favorite pizza. It's still off menu, and if you get the right day at the right Draft House, you can still get it. But also bring back Carrie League's bruschetta, which was one of the original menu items at Colorado. And I was told that it was actually just that was one of Carrie's dishes, and she loved making it. And when they opened the original location on Colorado, funny point there, I'll get to in a second. That she was just like, well, I can make this and I can do this at scale really easily. So that was one of the first items on the menu. But yeah, just showing how old we're all getting, particularly me, I feel. I mentioned the Alamo, Colorado to somebody, and somebody went, "Oh, do you mean the one in Denver?" I'm like, "No, I mean the original location." Oh God. It's so long now. People don't even know the history. I feel like I've come down from the mountain. I'm just shouting at kids, get off his cinematic lawn.
Yeah, I know that. So, one of the things that I've always held a bit with the Draft House is that it's an organization that seemed to operate more on enthusiasm than sort of like adults in the room for a lot of its history. Richard, you've reported on this. Our friends in Kansas City at the Pitch have reported on this. There's a lot of articles about sort of what sort of the darker periods in the Draft House's history are. But, I think one of the things that makes me optimistic for its future is, and maybe this is damning with faint praise, the floor is like beneath the earth when it comes to what we consider a viable movie theater experience at this point in time, right? Like there is a Cinemark that is in South Austin near where I live, and if there is a Southeast Asian film, if there's a Bollywood film that looks interesting and people that I trust on social media are like, this is a movie that you need to go see, you're going to have a really good time with it. It's going to play in one venue, probably in Austin. It's going to play in the Cinemark in South Park Meadows. And you sort of have to hold your nose. I mean, like, not a knock against the Cinemark itself. There's nothing unique or terrible about it other than the fact that it is like all the others, which is that people will sit where they're going to sit. They're going to talk through the movies. They'll be on their phones to the movies. The experience is not catered to anything that I would think of as sort of like a good movie theater experience. And I'm optimistic about the future of the Draft House just because even the watered down version of the Draft House is sort of like a bulwark against things that are driving people home. The movie theater experience that tells so many people, and you see that people talking about this constantly. Like, why would I go to the movies and listen to somebody talk for 2 hours for $30 if I can just like stay at home and watch it on my 70-inch television? The worst, most corporate draft house I've ever been to has still been better than the most indie branded AMC or Regal that I've been to, with the exception of the one up north that died, RIP. But I think that I think that is kind of the arena that they're playing in. Is they don't have to be great to be good. Like they don't have to be. And I wasn't here for the glory days of the Colorado and others, but they don't have to be some sort of transformative movie theater experience. They just have to be a place that you want to go and watch movies, and that is fading substantially, I think, across the board with a lot of their competitors.
Well, it's a combination of factors, not least that they rebounded faster than any other chain in the market after the pandemic. They were I think it was like 25% ahead of the rest of the market on attendance and on revenue. And now we're in this summer where, I mean, I hate to say the movies are back, baby, but it almost does feel like it. When you got Quiet Place Part 2 opening the biggest the franchise ever has, and it's in competition with Inside Out 2, which, Quiet Place 3, Inside Out 2, that they're competing for the top slot, and one of those films has been out for 3 weeks. That's not bad. I think we're doing okay.
Yeah.
And I think there is a lot of, people want to get out again. People have got stir crazy, and I think they've got over their fear of being inside.
Wasn't it just like 3 weeks ago that we were talking about how Furiosa was the death knell for cinema? God, it's fun how fast this stuff changes.
Well, I think that was more to do with Furiosa than anything else. I think the expectation of how much of an appeal there was for a Mad Max-less Mad Max film was remarkably overrated. I mean, great cast, but there's an upper limit on how much money that film was going to make, and it cost absolutely. I was joking with my wife earlier. I think it's very easy to both over and underestimate how much market interest there is in increasingly expensive sequels to a totally gritty indie exploitation flick out of Australia with no stars, made best part of 40 years over 40 years ago now.
Yeah.
Where it was so bad that they had to get their friends to basically just throw themselves out of cars because they couldn't afford stuntmen. I think we're in a much better indicator of where we are when it comes to the industry, and we're getting breakout films again. We're getting stuff that's doing better than any expected. We're getting stuff like Kill opening this weekend, which I think is going to do very nicely. It's not going to do huge numbers, but you talked about South Asian and Southeast Asian cinema. You can open stuff here now, same weekend that it's opening in Mumbai, and it's going to pull in 1 to 10 million. Bonus money for the Indian studios, great money for the cinemas. Same with, you dump an anime that most of your audience has never heard of, and it's going to open somewhere between 1 and 20 million. You put whichever Demon Slayer it is, put that out there in cinemas, it's going to make money. Whatever oddball anime about basketball or football is launching this week, they're going to make money because they know their niche. And I think that follows the Draft House model of going, okay, we've got to 30 to 60 seat screen, we can put this film in there. It's going to sell out. We don't even have to put it in a particularly great slot because the fan base is going to be there for it. Whatever time of day we put it on, we can anticipate it better. And I think it takes some of the risk out and it frees up the bigger rooms for your quiet places and your inside outs. And your Maxine's. So, I think they're in a really good position. And I think Sony, I think it's made a wise bet. I think it's money well spent.
Just a generic, or maybe not generic, but a random box office question, because in the news recently, along with Kill opening this week, which is fucking awesome. I cannot express my joy of this movie enough. I assume we all saw it at Fantastic Fest, or I think most of us at least saw it at Fantastic Fest.
I didn't.
You didn't, right?
Me neither.
Oh, you didn't? Okay, sorry. Well, I saw it at Fantastic Fest, and it was my favorite movie out of that festival, hands down. I have been on the promotion for this. It's so cool because my friends at home, who are my normal, air quotes, my normal movie friends, have been texting me for like over a month, like, dude, I see your name in like this trailer for Kill, like that's so fucking cool. And I'm like, no, you don't understand why that's cool. Like, this is an international action movie that's actually getting trailer placement in front of the movies you're seeing, and you're talking about it. I'm like, that is dope. But getting back to the question, we already know that we're getting a English language remake. Stileski's company is taking care of it. I think Chad is actually directing it. So like, does that announcement now to an American audience who looks at Kill playing and goes, well, I can just wait for the American version? Do they turn away, or do they still go see Kill coming out this weekend and then be like, all right, now I can't wait for the remake?
Well, how much of the regular audience is reading the trades? I mean, I think that raises the question, like, do they even know? I mean, if anything, I think that's probably going to put a few more bums in seats, just purely because people will go, oh, I'd never heard of this film before, and they're talking about it, and like, oh, the John Wick guy is gonna make a version of it. Oh, maybe I'll go see that. Yeah, and then they'll go and they'll see so much stabbing and bludgeoning and people being thrown out of trains a lot, and they'll go, oh, that was fun. So I think it might help a little bit. I don't know that there's going to be that much downside, just because like, how many people are actually going to know? I mean, bless you, Variety and Deadline, but I don't think the average punter is checking you out rigorously for reboot news. So yeah, it might be a little bit of a boost. I don't see it being too much of a detriment, except for nerds like us, because we're probably going to go like, oh, well, not nerds like us because we're not snobbish on these issues, but there are going to be some people who go, oh, it's being remade. I therefore am going to cast it out into the wilderness and never talk of this film again. Although I think we've gone past that a little bit, that too cool for school nonsense that afflicted a lot of film criticism for a while. But hopefully they've all been thrown out of a train window themselves.
So I like that you asked that question, Donato, because I mean, one of the things that I find myself thinking about in the current theatrical landscape is just like, what am I looking forward to, and do I know what I'm looking forward to because it's being marketed to me? It's an interesting time. We talk about things that we're seeing. You talk about the Kill trailer playing kind of like out large. I knew I was going to ask this question. I'm going to wind you up, and I'm really super curious, Richard, to see what your answer is. You are, without a doubt, the biggest fan of Mignola's Hellboy that I've ever met, and sort of wildly beneath the radar, probably because of the lack of success of the David Harbour remake. We've got a brand new Hellboy movie that's coming out in just a couple of months. I want to know your opinion as somebody who I'm sure has watched the trailer and has some thoughts. The purpose of Certified Forgotten is really to be excited about shit. And I knew when I had you on when we confirmed you're going to come on the podcast, I was like, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to ask Richard how he feels about a new Hellboy, if he's a purist about it or if you're actually excited about what Brian Taylor's going to do.
I mean, I knew it was happening because I keep an eye on what's happening with Hellboy. I'm honestly very excited by it. I know there's a lot of people grumbling and saying like, oh, it looks small and it looks cheap. And I'm like, well, here's the thing with Hellboy and cinema. The first Hellboy movie, Guillermo del Toro's first one, it was big and it was splashy and it's very pretty and it's fun, but Hellboy is a supporting character in it. It's a Guillermo del Toro film where they were afraid to make the central character the central character. The central character is the nebbish BPRD agent. He's your POV character. And then in Hellboy 2, The Golden Army, Hellboy is a supporting character again. It's the Abe Sapien movie. And people have always wondered why we didn't get a third Guillermo del Toro Hellboy movie. Well, two very simple factors. One, Golden Army did not do well. Two, Mike Mignola didn't want it to happen. At the end of the day, that was what it came down to. And if you can't make the argument and you got one of the key creatives, the key creative saying, it's that great quote that he's used about those films, that there was his Hellboy and Guillermo del Toro's Hellboy, and they were different things, and he just had to get used to that. Well, after a certain point, he didn't. He was like, Hellboy isn't going off and having kids with his girlfriend. Hellboy is an elaborate, multi-layered story that crosses literally millennia about the end of the world. I'm not interested in telling this. The David Harbour, Neil Marshall remake, total mess. I mean, it's interesting because I remember I used to get all the film times and the run times in a document like 2-3 weeks out. And 2 weeks out, it was being listed as 146 minutes. And when it arrives, it's dead on 2 hours. And I've always suspected it got completely butchered. I still don't think it was going to be particularly great. There's a lot of problems with it. But there's some stuff that's really cool, like the Baba Yaga sequence. That's wonderful. That's total Hellboy. And I look at what Brian Taylor, who makes crazy films, let's be honest. Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance, Crank. The second Crank film. I mean, he makes nutty films. And I look at this, and I'm like, this feels like the actual comic. Particularly, it feels like The Crooked Man, which was 2008 3-issue miniseries written by Mike Mignola, art by Richard Corbin, who absolute legend of horror comics, made his name on heavy metal. Did the artwork for Bat Out of Hell, the Meatloaf album. Like he's super distinctive, and it's one of the all-time great Hellboy stories. And it's small. It's not the end of the world. It's not huge elfin armies under the land. It's Hellboy going after a coven in 1950s Appalachia and dealing with this intermediary with the devil. And it's small and dark, and people die, and people are damned. And I look at it and go like, that looks like what Mignola's doing. And Mignola wrote the script with Christopher Golden, and Golden, horror writer, great, collaborated with Mignola on a whole bunch of stuff. So I look at it and go like, well, this is actually a Mike script, so I'm feeling a little better about it. And the look of it is that kind of smaller scale Hellboy. It's not the huge, super ambitious stuff. I don't think I look at this, I feel like we're more likely to get sequels to a $20 million horror movie shot in Bulgaria with a little bit of cachet around it. And I think the original Hellboy, film geeks are much more fond of that than regular audiences, and almost nobody remembers that the Golden Army had existed, and the David Harbour one is, you could tell the studio threw that out the door, because I think they chopped it down and put out an emergency edit and walked away, because that film does not exist in this household. And I'm a Hellboy completist. I was a Kickstarter backer on the board game. My house is structurally unstable in one corner because I have all the trade paperbacks. I still have the original 4-issue run in a long box in storage somewhere in the UK. It's one of my favorite comics of all time. And I look at this and go, I think we're actually getting that for once. And that's nice. I'm not sad. And most of the Hellboy comics fans I know who've looked at it and gone like, yeah, this feels like what we've always wanted, but we never were going to get from a big Hollywood version of this, because big requires big story to make the big budget back and big effects. And frankly, I'd rather just a good creep fest and witches and people being torn apart by monsters. Oh, and practicals. There was a lot of fuss because somebody involved with the production had said there were AI monsters in it. And Brian Taylor had to go on the record and say, like, no, he's talking about a different film. He just got everything screwed up. This is practicals. And I'm like, yes. And Brian Taylor loves practicals. That's why he did the kaiju sequence in Crank High Voltage. He loves rubber suits.
All I will say about the David Harbour Hellboy is, in my review, I wrote that it felt like there were two different directors with different parts, and they just cobbled them together at the end. And someone reached out to me, who will be unnamed, and said, you might not be far off. So I think that is a movie that had way more problems than just the runtime towards the end. And all I'm going to say is Neil Marshall has never been the same since. And that's, well, I don't know. I'm going to hold that for
I was going to say, there's a lot of reasons for that. We might want to let that one go.
We don't need to get into why that is, but it's a shame.
We don't need to talk about Neil Marshall.
He's made good movies.
I feel like those two conversations are a lot more closely aligned than I think you might think at first blush, because we're talking about the future of the film distribution industry and, us feeling positive about the Alamo Drafthouse. And we're talking about a movie a franchise, a comic book franchise in an era of comic book franchises, that is realizing that maybe you don't need to spend 6 figures, or what is it, 9 figures, 9 figures in order to, create a movie that people will go see and that you'll end up in the black at the end of the day. So smaller, niche, better seems to be sort of the theme of our conversation here at the beginning of the podcast. Speaking of smaller, better, niche, we have a film today that we think y'all are going to really enjoy talking about. So we're going to take a quick break. And then when we come back, we're going to talk about the 2021 horror film Landlocked. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back, everybody. So this week on the podcast, Richard has brought for us Landlocked, which was a 2021 release. It hit a few virtual festivals in 2020. You remember those. You remember things like Nightstream, where we were watching movies online for a hot minute. Kind of glad that happened. Kind of glad that it's over. No disrespect to those festivals. I kind of like my movies in the movie theater. But as a quick write-up for those of you who may have not heard of the film yet, which I'm going to assume is many of you, it is a family movie, a director who has taken his own home videos and turned them into something of a time-traveling horror film. When Mason's father dies, he leaves behind a single wish, that the home his sons grew up in will be demolished and the land sold by his children. But when Mason decides to visit his family home one last time, he discovers something incredible, a VHS camcorder that seems to capture Mason's past through its lens. As Mason fills up videotape after videotape with his childhood memories, he soon finds himself sucked into the darkness at the center of the home, and stuck in a past that leaves no future for Mason and his brothers. Using the director's real home videos, Landlocked is a powerful work of self-reflection from director Paul Owens. There you go. If that sounds appealing, it's 75 minutes. It's the greatest gift we could have given you guys. There's a fucking decent chance that this episode runs longer than the runtime of that movie. So, there you go. That's the way that it works. But as always, Richard, we're going to start with you and say, you had your pick. You gave us actually a couple of films. What made Landlocked be one of the movies that you really want to talk about on the podcast?
Well, I mean, clearly I have an affinity for ghost stories that could be mistaken for found footage. It's clearly a thing that I adore. I've always had a soft spot for ghost films, and I think it's being British. I think we're always just convinced that you go anywhere and something old is hiding there, and there's lineage and inheritance, and these kind of things always appeal to me, and that's so built into Landlocked. Like you said, Paul Owens he weaves his actual own family videos into this, even going back to very early footage of him on VHS as a baby, as a newborn. And this is really what the story is about. Is, like you said, this guy who his father's died. He goes home and he finds this video camera, this old VHS video camera that was a prized family possession. You can imagine at the time when his father bought it, this thing would have been ungodly expensive. This would have been something you treasured and looked after, and so much of his history was recorded on this, more than he realized it. And when he starts playing with it, he realizes that it's almost a time machine. It can show him parts of the past that he wasn't necessarily there for. He said, it's this mechanism of resetting the counter and the time on it, and it looks back to that moment in the house's history. And it's a way for him to reconnect with what he feels he has lost or is going to lose because of his father's wish that the building be demolished 1 year afterwards. And that's fascinating. There's something in that timing that is really meaningful, because this is a film about how we let mourning eat us alive. And that, this character is sat there looking at things that he was maybe not there for, or parts of the history, or parts of not even his history, but his family's history, intimate moments for other people who were in the building, his brothers, who are played by his brothers, which is, kind of audacious. It's really, like I said, a movie about sadness, about getting caught up in mourning, about not knowing when to let go of the past. And the fact his father basically says, you have a year to get over me dying. You have to sort out all your feelings. And that Mason clearly has completely failed to do this. It's a tragedy. But I love ghost stories that aren't just ghost stories. I love a good there's something spooky in the house. But the idea of a ghost is always that it is history catching up with you. And if you lose to the ghost, then you are being trapped in your own history, in your own previous actions. You cannot get away from it. Another film this really reminded me of was Lace Crater, which Lindsay Burridge, fantastic performance. She plays a woman who becomes a ghost because becoming a ghost is actually an STD. She has sex with a ghost, and he goes, well, I hate to break it to you, but this is kind of what happens to you now. And it's not done in kind of that cheesy 80s way that you had a lot, or even that is spoofed in Beetlejuice, where like, now you're married to a demon and you have to go off and salsa dance in hell, or whatever that film is really about. Does anybody know what Beetlejuice's plan really was? That's always, apart from like underage sex with Winona Ryder, which makes that film even creepier if you think about it for 5 seconds. It doesn't feel like he's got a well laid out plan. And this is, Lace Crater does something similar in that you've got a movie about somebody who makes this huge mistake and just has to live with the consequences of I'm kind of stuck with my dead boyfriend now, and we're both kind of a little sad about this fact. And Landlocked has that same feeling for me of somebody who is trapped in grief and doesn't even realize it. He's failing to process. This is kind of it's almost like an advert for therapy. It's like, if you'd only like talk to somebody about it rather than just go, well, maybe I'd just look at one more thing, at something that I wasn't there for. And that, this idea that there is something weird about the house as well. But you're also left to wonder, like, is this all self-inflicted? Is this him just thinking he sees it? There's one moment where you go like, oh no, there is something strange happening because something is caught on the camera and he doesn't see it, and that's the only moment where you go, there's definitely something supernatural at play. And that's the one moment where I'm like, I almost wish that Paul Owens, who's the writer, director, editor, and also plays one of the brothers, because he is one of the brothers. I almost wish he'd left that out because it's a little too on the nose. It's the moment where I'm like, don't, no, you could have left that and it would have been perfectly fine as just an absolute paranoia piece. But the rest of it really is just this POV. It's almost dialogue free as well, because it's just him watching the past. And so having the sound, so much of it just be old conversations, and I think a few reconstructed conversations as well, and a couple of artificial scenes in the video flashbacks. But this willingness to use your own history, I think, is fascinating. I would love to sit down with the family and go like, well, so working through some issues here, because that's what it feels like.
It does. And I haven't had any opportunities to read interviews with the director. I'm not sure if this was overtly a piece that he put in there, but it's an election year. We're constantly thinking about a slice of middle America that is, for all intents and purposes, trapped in a version of the country that they have sort of romanticized at a certain time period. And I think I don't think that this film intended to be political, but because I think of like the rural nature of where it's set, because it's a predominantly white family, because it's sort of like looking through this rose-tinted glasses of this father character who, when we see him in the home videos prior to having children, kind of clearly doesn't have his shit figured out at all, right? Is just sort of a dude. It ends up making what I think to be sort of an interesting political statement of the idea that they're like this idealized time that we look back for was populated by all of these people that were searching for an idealized time to look back for, right? And it's like you just chase that line of reasoning back to the beginning of time. So the ghost story elements I think are really interesting, and we'll talk more about that. But one of the things that I thought about after I was over, I was like, oh, this is inadvertently like a New York Times essay about like, what do these people, what are they holding on to, and what is sort of driving the way that they're engaging with the world. Whether that was intentional for Owens or not, I can't say, but it is a subtext that you can't help but read in there, given the state of the world writ large. And it's really interesting to watch how these characters grapple with their own nostalgia, family history, and how that seems to shape their unwillingness to move beyond whatever moment in time that they're in the present. It was a thought that you could get lost in a little bit with the film.
So basically, Ghost meets Hillbilly Elegy.
Yeah, like honestly, a little bit. Yeah, like it does sort of have those or Frequency, if you want to add, another a much less artistic film, Jim Caviezel and Dennis Quaid.
Can we not?
Theme of this podcast is just us bringing up names of talents and being like, let's not talk about them. But yeah, I mean, you're not wrong, Richard. That is kind of the vibe that I walked away from. But I think that's just sort of the nature of like anytime you open a window that clearly between 2 points in time, like everything is going to come through, right? Whether you meant it to or not.
Oh, one of my favorite sequences is it feels so throwaway at the time, and you're watching it go like, was this planned? Is this actually something that he just caught? Because it doesn't feel like a narrative decision. Is when this random woman turns up at the house and just goes, "Hey, I see that they're knocking this down. Can I come in because I grew up here?" So this moment, this idea that there's history before his history, that he's trying to claim this place as just his own. It's like, it was never just yours. So there's almost this warning there of like, if you try and exist solely within this space, time is going to pass against you. She just wants to come in, have a look around, and go away. And so she's what should happen. This interest in your past, and it's not this complete rejection. You're not trying to completely bury it, or as in the father's case, to destroy it, quite literally eradicate it. send the wrecking ball in. She comes in and she just wants that one last little moment. And I find that really fascinating. I think we've all had that instinct of wanting to go back to somewhere that was home. And I think it's for a multitude of reasons. I mean, I've kind of avoided it. Unless it's like going back to a house where there's people I know still live there. That's the only reason I would go back. I'm not romantic about location in that way. I mean, I couldn't find most of the places that I lived in on a map. In fact, I was a while ago. I was trying to work out like everywhere I've lived. You go through that list of like trying to remember every house you've lived in. And I suddenly remembered I'd forgotten like 3 of them over the years. So it was like I was only there like 6 months, but hang on. So when was I there? I know I was there. I have photos of me in this place. No connection to it. I think the only time I've really had that kind of interest, a few years ago, I didn't go in person because it was like I feel like down that path madness lies. But I looked at the Google Street View of the house I was born in, and I was furious because they torn up the rose bushes that were in the front garden, and I was like, okay, but it's not my house, it's not my place anymore, and I feel, there's a couple of other houses that I've lived in that I want to show my wife sometime just so she'll get an idea because I've talked about them. But I don't have an interest to kind of do the same kind of emotional archaeology that Mason's doing in this film. It just doesn't attract me. And I think that's part of the reason I'm so fascinated by this film is like, that people do have that urge to stay connected to these places. And in here, it's slightly different because it's about the connection to his father. But even his father's told him explicitly, like, you can't hold on to this forever because if you try and hold on to the house as a way to hold on to me, it's not going to work. It's going to just swallow you up. You are going to be demolished with the house, which is, the quite literal denouement of this film.
That's the opening dialogue we hear is the father being like, here's the stakes, and then a movie where a character ignores it for 75 minutes. Donato, you've been nodding along, but you've been a little quiet. I'm curious how this one how this one sits with you, especially because I feel like we've talked a lot in the podcast about the sense of going home and how complicated that is. All the more so when you move, all 3 of us thousands of miles away from the place that you grew up. Were you vibing with the same parts of the movie that Richard and I have been talking about? Were you connecting to the temporal ghost story that it's telling?
Yeah, I think number one, I thought Richard picked this movie because he looks like the father. Shout out to Jeffrey Owens looking like a younger Richard Whittaker.
Younger? Fuck you.
When he's in his 30s, when they show him at the
exactly.
Oh yeah.
No, sorry.
Oh,
the video footage.
I don't look like a corpse, or when he's lying in bed, clearly dying of cancer.
No, not that.
I think I'm looking a little healthier than that.
I meant the video footage. Yes, when we go back. But if we're gonna talk about this, number one, I want to shout out past guest Ari Drew wrote a piece for Bloody Disgusting that is dealing with Landlocked and a few other films that came out at the same time, Outwaters, Skinamarink, and like liminal spaces and movie making that takes a look at these purgatories or however you want to call them and how they address them. And I do think Landlocked is really interesting for all the reasons Richard just said, but it's also interesting for me because growing up, like, I'm getting more pictures sent to me now than I ever did a while ago. My family just isn't, we weren't recording videos for every single event. We weren't taking pictures for every single birthday, Christmas, stuff like that. Like, I know those exist somewhere, but they just weren't something that we watched a bunch. Like, it's not something that we had a great catalog of. So it is interesting to use this as a time machine and look back. where like I don't really have an affinity for those kind of things in a way. Like I have an affinity for memories, and it's not about where we are, it's more about what we're doing and how that goes down. So like my approach I think is a little different from Mason's, where when inevitables happen and stuff like that, like it'll be more about what I shared with people and what is still left with me, versus like that video camera that kind of keeps you stuck there. Like I think the way that it uses grief and the way that it uses, you can either let it basically demolish you, not to again like borrow that term that the film so clearly uses. You can let it demolish you, or you can get over it. And I remembered, well, not I remembered, but like I tied this movie to The Last Will and Testament of Rosalind Lee, which Brad McCarg brought to the podcast. And I think it's such a beautiful depiction of, again, grief and going home and having to go through, in this case, your mother's things, and how the deeper he gets into not wanting to leave, the more her spirit becomes a part of the house. So I think those parallels are what interest me the most. And with Landlocked, it's taken a little while to get to where it wants to. I think even 75 minutes is a bit of a stretch for it. But at the same time, the way it hits you with its horror moment, the way it finally turns into a quote unquote horror movie for me, it just kind of comes out of nowhere in a good way. It hits me and I go, oh no, like this is now getting a little freaky. This is now getting into the terms of what is happening. Where are we? And being trapped in your own mind. In this case, obviously we're watching the film and we're watching through a lens, but that is also Mason's mind. Like he is trapped in there. He cannot get out of it. And I think it's a really cool interpretation of that, to use that liminal space, and even the little tricks of the fly that flies on the screen, and it is on the screen while Mason is on the screen, I believe, or he's just after been. So you get that breaking of the wall where there's an insect on top of a lens, but what is behind that lens and what is reality? And that, like you have basically like put it between two panes of glass, where obviously it's not on our screen, but it's on the screen of the movie. And what the fuck is happening? That's those little details that get me. Those are the little nudges that make you go, oh no, like reality is distorting, and I don't actually know which one it is. I think I do, but it leaves a nice question there.
There are a few components that are kind of the more overtly horror elements. This shambling figure that appears, and you kind of look at it and go, what's the point of that? Because it doesn't need to tie in. And that's what I actually liked, because what it says is there's history that you can't know, even in your own, in what you think is your own environment. And if you start pulling at these threads, if you may find things that just don't make sense to you, and that it's maybe there's reasons why the father wanted the house demolished that we don't know about. But for Mason to just go, oh, I can unpack my entire house by just looking through my entire life through just looking through old videos. The film says, no, you can't. You literally can't. All you're doing is damaging yourself. All you're doing is cherry picking, and that's really highlighted at this great moment where there's one tape where he's like, this is too much for me emotionally, and he throws it in the middle of the road, waits for it to get run over. And it's a great scene because it's so differently shot to anything else in the film. It's the only comedy beat in the movie, and it's so delicious. And I think it's maybe a 30-second shot with like 10 seconds of payoff in there. It's so perfectly done, and it acts as this great kind of chapter mark in the film, and about and in his decay, because now he's saying like, oh, I want to know what my history is, and I want to know my family, and unpack these things, find what it was that I went on in my life, and have these last little extra moments of contact with my father. But when it's something he doesn't like, he's like, oh no, I didn't mean that. Oh no, I know. And you think you can control the past, and well, you can't. The past is ugly, and at a certain point, you've got to go, it's the past. There's nothing I can do to fix it. All I can do is either stare at it even more and try and make sense of it, and that's a highway to nothing, or just say it's the past, let it collapse or be demolished, or just sit in whatever memories I can take away. Or the base. There's a great subplot with his brother stealing some stuff, which is kind of a wonderful moment where I think you could have had the film do a lot more with this, but again, I think that would have really felt like padding, where he uses the camera, just rewinds in time a little bit to work out that his brother stole this base out of the house and doesn't think that he knows that it's happened, and has stuck it in the back of the car. And I think that that's, again, a commentary on how we handle our past and what it is we want to hang on to, because he wants to hang on to these memories and these visions. His brother's just like, I just want the base. I just want the base and the cool old car that I'm going to completely rebuild. So even, is his approach healthier? Ambiguous. Never really resolved. And I think that's the thing I like is, the 75 minutes means there's no attempt to, logicalize or create a moral. It's just like, this is what happens and these are the perils. And I like that in the film. It doesn't try and give you like a guide to life. It gives you a guide to how to not destroy your life.
Yeah, and I inherently the mechanism of the camera in itself is just interesting, because what we are seeing from our point of view is it's not really like a found footage movie. Like there's no finding of the footage. We are seeing it happen live, which is like, it's not technically live, but I love the view of just Mason with the camera looking at a lake per se. It's just how any movie would be shot. And then when he looks through the camera, he can see the video of what could be happening. And then all of a sudden it is happening. And that breaking of, maybe that is the first time he falls into this other space, this other parallel. But like, that's interesting to me, to like point and shoot with the camera and we can see normality, but then on the camera itself is this memory, and having them blend over, and like you're looking at an empty room, but through the camera you're looking at some vivid memory. It's just clever. It's very cleverly done, and I think that is what makes this movie kind of like more interesting. It doesn't really conform to what would be described as found footage or one of the subgenres. It kind of just weaves and bobs through first person in some scenes and then third in others, and there is no continuity in a way, which makes it all the more easy to fall into and get enveloped in. I do think, like you said, it's still padded for 75 minutes. I think there's a 60-minute or something in there, like the runtime of Host. But obviously Host had a lot more energy to it. This is a daydream. It is kind of just falling into a fever dream, even in a sense, in some of those scenes with that smoking corpse. I love the read on basically, you don't know the entirety of a story through the video. Like the video is what you see, that is your memory. It's blocking other things out. But I think that smoking corpse, it does suggest that there is other things going on that Mason does not know about. And yeah, I mean, it is an interesting request from a father to be like, to burn it all down, get rid of it. Like, I think of other friends and family and stuff like that where it's not how it went, So what is that impetus? Why is that the motivation? And that is, that is kind of scary in a way.
But Donato, you bring up a good point when you're talking about sort of the structural elements of the camera, is that, Owens recognizes that he has probably 3 different versions of the technology that he can use, right? He can do the things that Mason was there from but doesn't remember. He can do the things that Mason was there from and does remember, which is like the more contemporary, when he like goes back and looks at the stuff since the start of the movie. And then he can do the things that he's there for but doesn't see or doesn't know, which is sort of the more supernatural, like he begins to see or perceive reality through the lens of the camera, even though the camera is broken, which happens, in the, like, let's say like final 15 or 20 minutes of the movie. So part of what Owens, the director, is doing with Mason, the character, is evolving the role that the camera plays and getting closer and closer to some of those truly scary horror beats that they offer, because it's benign, and then it's misleading, and then it is something else. And I think that that is, every filmmaker every producer in existence, when they say, well, I've got a movie to make, what do I do? Well, what do they tell you? They're like, oh, go shoot what you have, right? Like, you have a car, you've got a road movie, right? That's what the Duplass brothers said, is, well, we had a car, and so we were like, great, we'll do a movie in a car, things like that. They had home videos.
We had some bags, so we made Baghead.
Correct. Yeah, exactly that. These people had, the Owens family had home videos in a house, and they managed to turn it into a movie that has more poignancy than I think a lot of the stuff that comes out. And it's a real testament to, the spirit of like, even figuring out, how do I use home footage in 3 different ways to progressively make my story scary, is like delightfully innovative. It's really clever stuff.
Agreed. Basically agreed. That's the thing. It really feels like a movie that was just took everything they had close to hand. And the fact it was released during the pandemic, when all we had was, video memories. And, particularly, there's something fascinating about the choice of an older video camera, because it's this equipment that does represent something from an entire life. I think if it had been like cell phone footage, this film wouldn't work in the same way. You have to have this piece of kind of quasi antique equipment that is something from his childhood, and that he has to kind of remember, like, oh, the tactile experience of dealing with this and taking the tapes out, and it, something that would have been his father's pride and joy as much as his boys were. You can really feel that history in this great big lumpen object he's got to wield around on his camera, on his shoulder, and it also increases the idea that he's carrying this as a burden. I mean, if this was like a 16 millimeter or a high 8 video, it wouldn't be the same impact, because he's a small guy as well. He's skinny and kind of a little bird-like in some ways. So for him to be wandering around with this great big piece of equipment on his shoulder, you like go, you've taken a burden on yourself, and you aren't prepared to put this down. And that's the underlying metaphor here of that camera. Of like, it's not just the footage; it is the object itself, which becomes the weight that he is always dragging around with him, and it eventually, he almost absorbs it in himself, at the point where it gets destroyed. Like, he is the camera at that point. And the psychological damage or supernatural damage or mixture of both that has been done, it's irrevocable at that point. And that's the tragedy. It's not even the end. The end is kind of just the coda. By the point the camera gets destroyed, there's no fixing him. And he's going down this path, and it's all he wants at that point, and he doesn't need to have the physical object with him anymore, because it's redundant. It's done its damage. It's done its job. It's made him what he always wanted to be, which is somebody stuck in a past that is going to be destroyed.
Yeah, and I mean, the VHS grain, the fuzz, it is evocative of a memory of generations now, that it is bygone. Like, that is a technology that is outdated. We don't have that anymore. Well, if you have an app on your phone, you can turn it into looking like an old school video camera, but having it be that type of camera, having it be that kind of home video, immediately hits core memories for so many people. Like, it is just relatable. It is something that we all understand. It is so signature. And that is key, because that pulls us in, instead of it being some type of format that would push us away.
And also, it still exists. which is one of the things that's funny, is like the number of old formats that if you show somebody a Betamax tape, or they go, what's that? Or you show somebody like a mini DV, like, half those tapes don't work anymore, or old hard drives. The number of people I know who they shot on digital, and they're like, Yeah, I'm a little worried because your original copy of the film might just burst into flames. If I that literally happened, I was talking to the director of Pig, and he hadn't shown it since I think when it first played at South by Southwest in 2006. And for the 10th anniversary, they asked him like, "Bring it back. We want to show it again." And he went, "Okay." And he went and found the two hard drives it was on and pulled the file off, and it literally one of the drives, as soon as he finished, burst into flames. And he was like, "That's the only copy that existed." I think he's got it. I think he's got backups now. But he was like, "Yeah, this stuff's weirdly fragile." Whereas you can find VHS tapes from when they first became commonly available, and they'll still play. So they're weirdly like the one stable piece of digital media we've got, which is kind of disturbing.
And that opens the door for, the last question that we always like to ask on the podcast is the notion of how does this film, find the audience that it deserves? Because we've talked a lot about both the context in which this was released, and it is not an accident, I think, that there has been so much good film criticism written about what is essentially a movie that played at a couple of online-only festivals in 2020 and sort of slipped onto streamers with not a lot of fanfare. There are really good horror critics that keep lining up to take a shot at articulating why this movie sits right for them. So, Richard, let's start with you. Where does the future of this film sit, and how does it earn its place among fans who might be interested in the themes or the ideas that it's kicking around?
I think it'll do it slowly. That's my gut. I think this is one of these ones that will be a word of mouth. I don't feel it's going to have like some sudden big advocate because for a film that was like you said did a handful of streaming festivals, so much really great tiny cinema it got it shot during that era because people were going like, we want to run a festival, nobody's going to give us bigger titles, we've got to put something out there. And so they were going through stuff that they probably would have taken a pass on 2-3 years earlier, not because of quality, but they're just like, well, we've got so many slots and we need our headliners, we've got our retrospective screenings, and we got a couple of alumni who've got films, and we got this one's really cool. So the slush pile for a film like this is normally where they end up. So for it to get into anything, I think really helped it. The fact that Dark Sky picked it up, probably for a song, and the fact that now it is creeping onto streamers. It's now on Shudder, which is where I stumbled across it. I mean, I was like, I'm sure I remember the name from somewhere, and the poster was a little bit familiar. And I think it's one of these ones that's going to be, to a certain degree, word of mouth. And I don't think that hurts because it is slow. It is deliberately paced. It is a little abstract. I've heard it referred to as slow horror cinema, which I think people are just trying to make into a real thing at the moment because this has cropped up on Shudder at the same point that In a Violent Nature is in cinemas. So people do love to make a scene. They love to conjure these up out of nowhere. But I think this is one that's going to be people saying like, "Hey, I know you like this, this, and this." It's a little weird one. I found it interesting that you mentioned that this was connected with Outwaters and Skinamarink because it's kind of the polar opposite of this. Skinamarink, I've said, I think it's a terrible film, but I think it would have been a great installation. And Outwaters, I'm fine with. I don't have terrible problems with. I just think some of the decisions are a little bit mannered and forced, and I think there's other things that do something very similar, and it raises itself above a quagmire of not particularly great POV horrors that just by having those artistic decisions on the cinematography, but not all of them work out. So whereas this is much clearer, it's much cleaner, it's much simpler in its presentation, but it's the story that's more ambiguous. And I think it's going to take people coming to this film on their own terms. And I think a lot of people are going to start it and go, "This is boring. Nothing's happened in the first 10 minutes." Probably the rest of it isn't for you either, so that's fine. It's just not your kind of movie. But I think the people who get 10 minutes in and go like, "Ah, where's this even go?" Because those first 10 minutes, there's nothing to tell you this is a horror film at all. And when I was watching it, because I went in pretty much blind, watching it on Shudder, I'm like, this is a bold acquisition for them, but I'm into it. You know, there's this feeling of sadness and dread that's and loss that's somewhere in this movie. I want to know where it goes, and the fact that it goes to this place of a haunted video camera, I think it's a wonderful decision. It's it's utterly unique in that way, in its tone, in its pacing, in how it introduces its weirder elements. I haven't seen a film quite like it in a very long time, and I think people are going to stumble across it by accident or be guided delicately towards it. And if they find it and can appreciate that delicacy to it, I think they're really going to, find a place for it in their hearts.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to recommend because exactly what you said about someone turning it on for 10 minutes and being turned off by it. It was the first response to me tweeting out, "I'm finally watching Landlocked." One of my followers literally said that. They verbatim were like, I turned it on for 10 minutes. I didn't think anything was happening, but if you're recommending it or if you're even giving it a watch, maybe I'll go back to it someday. And I do believe that if the first 10 minutes aren't hooking you, you're probably not going to be in for the rest of the concept. If I'm being completely honest, you have to be okay with that deliberate pacing. You have to be okay with the speed that the film chooses. So for me, how does it find its audience? How does it do the thing we always talk about on Certified Forgotten? It just organically finds its viewers, because this is not one of those things you can mass market. It's hard to even tie it to another movie. Again, if I had to really tie it to a movie, I would pick The Last Will and Testament of Rosalind Lee. I think those thematic values are very shared, and you can have a really intimate and like heartfelt double bill if you do those together. But outside of it, I only knew about it because of Ari. I only knew about it because of Night. Why am I blanking on the Night Festival? The one that was the amalgamation. Yep, there you go. So I knew it was around. It just was never a priority, and that's on me. That's a wholly like I've got to take my assignments and do my shit, and Landlocked just never fit into it. But yeah, it's a harder one because I know what it is now, and it's not. It's a vibes only horror movie, and that is not a lot of people's thing. A lot of more, let's say more general consumers, and that is not derogatory. It is totally fine. It's just a general movie going audience. They need structure. They need to be told what's happening. They need certain things. So when you go completely art house avant-garde and try some shit, all for it. But harder for me to go to people and say, you should watch Landlocked because it's a descent into liminal madness. Like, not really as catchy. So I hope it finds its audience. Obviously, this is why we do it. We try to get people to listen to a podcast and maybe find a new movie out. So if that's working, that's all that matters.
Double bill with cries and whispers.
Yep. Well, there you go. It is a vibes movie. It's not going to be for everybody, but we certainly hope that it is for you. Richard, it was really great to have you back on the podcast, man.
Well, it was delight. Yeah, it's always nice to see you guys.
Do you want to talk about anything you got coming up?
Just kind of my normal staying busy, working at the you can find my stuff at the Austin Chronicle. I've got a few projects that I'm working on at the moment that hopefully I'll have more news about pretty soon. Just watch this space. But yeah, you can normally find my reviews at austinchronicle.com.
Donato, where do folks go to find your content? Dirty word and all.
As always, you can find me at Donatobomb on Twitter, Letterboxd, Instagram, Blue Sky, a little tiki-taki. Anywhere there's a social, I'm Donatobomb. What am I doing? Just it's fucking everything. I'm writing I think I've posted like 7 articles and it's fucking Wednesday and I'm tired. I haven't slept earlier than 3 a.m. for 2 weeks. We're doing it. Make it worthwhile. Follow me. Read my shit. Love you all.
Make it happen. You can follow me on Blue Sky. That's where I am. You can go to certifiedforgotten.com to check out some of the awesome film criticism that we publish. I want to shout out in particular, earlier this year, January of 2024, we published a piece on Landlocked. Emily Nasser Hall, who is an incredible, I would say, leans academic writer that has written for us a couple of times, published a piece on the millennial techno anxiety of Landlocked. It, like the movie itself, is a little dense in the best possible way. So if you like the discussion today and you want to read even more about Landlocked, we recommend that you start there and go check it out. Of course, you can also go to patreon.com/certifiedforgotten. You can sign up for our free newsletter, or if you're feeling particularly generous, you can throw a couple of bucks our way and make sure that we have the budget we need to pay the piper. And by the piper, I mean WordPress engine. We mean our annual Zencaster subscription, our podcasting network, all the good stuff that helps keep us up and our writers happy and well fed. Richard, you are officially now in the Two-Time Club.
Yay!
Ghost Home Movies.